Hi, everyone, and welcome to Discovery's Chats with Changemakers. I'm your host, Tiffany, and I'm an 11th grader in Texas. I participated in Discovery's Future City competition when I was in middle school. I'm really excited to be back for our third season of Chats with Changemakers. Each month, we welcome a different guest from the engineering community. Today, I'm chatting with Vatsal Shah, also known as Dr. V. He's a civil engineer, a professor, and a member of the National Society of Professional Engineers. Dr. V, welcome. We're so excited for you to join us today.
Thanks for having me, Tiffany.
I'm going to ask Dr. V a few questions to get to know a little more about him. You can ask questions too by typing in your question in the Q&A box below, and we'll save time to answer as many as we can. So, Dr. V, I understand you're a civil engineering professional, and more specifically, a geotechnical engineer. What's that like?
Well, civil engineering is basically the engineering that deals with infrastructure. So we're really glad to be part of what makes all of our roads work, all of our water pipes work, basically all the things that we see in our daily life is civil engineering. And that's all the good stuff. It's all the things that we can see. But being a geotechnical engineer is the things that we can't see. So all those things I talked about, whether it's bridges or roadways or tunnels or water treatment plants, all of those things have to be on something. And geotechnical engineering is the study of how you put things in the ground. So all the foundations that these buildings sit on and how we deal with all the soil and rock that we have to work with.
That sounds like a pretty fundamental role for any kind of construction. So the earth isn't something like concrete and steel that are human made. How do you figure out how to deal with what Mother Nature gives us?
Well, I love geotechnical engineering because I always call it the engineer's engineering. You know, when we're doing geotechnical engineering, you have to basically figure out how things work. You know, concrete and steel, we make those materials. We know when they bend, we know when they break, we know how they're going to behave because we make them. But Mother Nature throws us a curveball pretty often. If you ever go out to your backyard and dig a hole and you go 50 feet away and dig another hole, it's never the same thing. So when you're dealing with the soil, you're dealing with the ground, you can't see below the ground surface. So you have to basically investigate to figure out how the ground is actually going to behave to your work. So every day is a new challenge, whether you're working with a ground in one site or a ground somewhere else. You're always basically changing your mind, learning every day you're working to understand how Mother Nature is going to react to your loads and your structures.
Wow, that sounds like it's pretty difficult because you have a large variety of different materials in the earth. How do you analyze what's in the earth exactly?
Sure. So it's pretty straightforward. When we try to figure out what's beneath our building, for instance, or beneath a bridge, you have to actually go into the ground and collect samples. So we typically do what's called a ground investigation. So just like you would collect materials from going out into the backyard with a shovel, you can basically go out there with a much bigger shovel or an excavator and dig what's called a test pit. And the test pit allows you to see what the ground looks like. You can create a hole. And from that test pit, you can take samples, like whether it's clay or gravel or sand, all the different materials, and then bring them back to a lab to see how they're going to behave under your load and under all the work that you're going to put on it. We can also look at the ground by doing what's called a boring. And a soil boring is something where we actually use a drilling rig, and the drilling rig can basically drill down to the ground, bring up a sample, we look at the sample and we classify it, and we keep doing that for however deep we want to go. And we've gone with drilling samples down to 400 or 500 feet before to see how deep the soil can be.
Wow, that's a long ways down. What's the most severe geohazard incident that could be avoided?
Oh, that's a good question. So with anything with geotechnical engineering, the ground tends to be a pretty significant risk. And when you're dealing with the ground, you have a lot of things called geohazards. And geohazards are things that really could impact your infrastructure. So imagine that you're building on the side of a mountain or you're on the top of a mountain. If you put load on top of the mountain, that load or that slope may want to slide and push down. So we have slope stability, which is a big geohazard. Or if you're building a road at the bottom of the mountain and you cut away where the base of the mountain is, it may also cause that to slide down there too. We also deal with a lot of different geohazards that all of us can be familiar with. Imagine earthquakes. When the ground shakes, everything on top of it moves just as well. So we're dealing with geohazards like earthquakes also. I think the biggest geohazard we come across, though, is really not understanding how the ground is beneath our sites. And I think that's when we've seen a lot of projects have difficulty. There's not enough attention paid to how is the ground going to behave? What does it look like? and how can we make sure that our structure can work in the ground.
Well, that really highlights the importance of geotechnical engineering and keeping everyone safe.
Yeah.
So I understand that you are one of the youngest engineers to become licensed in New Jersey. Can you describe what a professional engineer is?
Sure. It's one of my favorite subjects. So just like when you go to school, most people think you go to a college and you get your degree and then you're an engineer. But when you go to school for engineering, what you're really learning is the whole mindset process of what engineering is, how to think like an engineer. And when we go through our challenge here today, we also talk about the engineering design process, how we basically go through and understand how to frame the problem, what the problem is, how to find a solution for it, then test out our problem and see if it'll actually work for what we have to deal with, and then keep doing that continuous loop, improve, keep working until it actually gets to our solution that we're looking for. So going to school and becoming an engineer allows you to be in the business of engineering. But just like a doctor or a medical professional, right, or a lawyer, we have to get licensed too. So the professional engineer or the term engineer is actually a licensed term. So all across the states of the United States, when you graduate, you are practicing engineering, but you can't call yourself an engineer until you get licensed as a professional engineer first. And it's great because it allows you to give your professional opinion on something. You can show off your technical wisdom. You can sign and seal all of your documents, which are great too. So you can submit them so the public can rely on the fact that you have designed this safely. But also, it's great to have a little bit of alphabet soup after your name because it gives you a title you can put as a professional engineer, which is also a great thing too.
Yeah, that makes sense that you want to make sure that people in critical positions are properly trained and licensed.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
in what ways do you think that your job encourages you to be a change maker?
Oh, I think I love civil engineering the most because you get to interact with the public because all the stuff that we do really involves things that interact with every person on a daily life. You know, the roads we drive, turn the light bulbs on, the buildings we live in, we turn on the faucet and the water comes out. The best thing about civil engineering is that it really puts you in front of what we need as people on a daily basis. Unlike other engineering fields, we don't get to sit behind an office. We don't get to sit in a lab and do research work or not see our patients and watch the impact it makes. When you're in civil engineering, you really get to have that impact. You get to see your actual work constructed in front of your eyes. You get to see thousands of people use your roadway, your bridge, your tunnel every day. And I think that's the best part because we're making such an impact, whether it's myself as a geotechnical engineer or other civil engineers, we really get to work with owners to understand their problem, which is really nice up front. We get to work with the community to see how we can solve those problems. We get to work with the contractors to watch them build the solutions to those problems. And sometimes we get to work with all the lawmakers and the politicians to make sure we have all the funding and budget to make sure, our society can basically run around the solutions that we come up with.
That's amazing that you get to not only work with a lot of people, but also affect a lot of people's lives.
Yep.
So we have our first audience question. What happens if you hit a pipe in the ground?
Well, if you hit a pipe in the ground, you got to make sure that's not a dangerous pipe. So if you're going through and you hit a water pipe or a gas pipe, we basically have to stop our work, make sure everyone's safe because safety comes first. Then we get away from the work site, we assess the situation. We talk to the utility company if we hit their pipeline. We have them close the pipeline down, and then we figure out a fix.
Awesome.
That's a great
question.
So
it's important to try new things, even if they're hard. Can you tell us about a time that you failed at something and what you learned from the experience?
Oh, absolutely. I think what I did really poorly coming out of school, and a lot of students and younger professionals have trouble with. When I came out of school, I was a hotshot engineer. I knew what I was doing. And I wanted to start designing buildings. But obviously, like anyone, in the very beginning, you learn a lot of work through school, through textbooks, through practice, but it takes years and years to learn the profession, learn the trade. So I remember I was given a project in the first few weeks I started working, and I spent 1 or 2 weeks basically just spinning my wheels, thinking about how to solve this project. And I pulled out all my old classmates and read through all my books. But the one thing I didn't do was I just didn't ask the question. And you always find that engineers and folks in the STEM profession love to teach. We love to train. We love to help people around us. That's what's actually our calling in this profession. So I wish I'd asked my manager at that point, hey, how do I handle this? Because after 2 weeks of trying to figure out myself, I went and asked the simple question, and he was more than willing to help me out. He helped me learn, he helped me go through the whole process. So if I learned anything from that, it's there's no shyness in asking a question. And I've heard that so many times in my life, and I actually came across that working. So now if I have a question, the first thing I do is ask someone around me, because it's just like engineering, you're working in a community. You want to, get feedback from people around you, but you also want to get the right answers too.
That's amazing that you were able to use those experiences early on to learn and improve for the future.
Yeah.
So I understand that you're a professor at a college too. Did you
Mhm.
always know that you wanted to be a teacher?
Yes, I actually knew that from when I started working. So I had a few classes when I was in engineering school, and I always found that the best professors that I worked with were professors that were actually practicing engineers also. People who not only understood the stuff in the books, because you read it, and it's great, but also were out there and they were designing pretty significant projects. And when they would come into our classes and basically teach us about how we apply all of our learning to being in the field and being in the profession, it was amazing. So I got the opportunity after finishing my PhD to go back and teach at night at my alma mater, which was at NGIT in Newark. And it was a great experience. The first few semesters that I had, you really get to watch students come into your class not knowing the subject, and they walk out with such a deep appreciation of what you're doing. And that's a great situation to have. You basically help someone else, transfer your knowledge to them and let them be better.
What's your favorite thing about teaching?
I think my favorite thing about teaching is watching the light bulb go off. When you talk to someone and you help them, when they get it, it's just an amazing feeling. So being able to watch students again come into class, and we go through problems together at the beginning of the semester, and we talk through how we design foundations and how we design excavations and those sort of things. It's a completely different subject for all these students when they come in, and watching them be able to apply all that theory, all that this is how it might work, this is how it could work, and actually design things when they leave the class. That's an amazing feeling too.
I'm sure that's a very rewarding part of your career, being able to share your knowledge and experience to help others.
Yep.
So we have another audience question from Megan. How do you use teamwork in your day-to-day job?
Well, nothing gets done alone in engineering. Just like you imagine, if you want to build a building, you don't just do all the work yourself. So for me, I'm a geotechnical engineer, and that's usually my specialty. Even though civil engineers can understand and work with structural and the water resources and work with architectural, it's hard to do all those different pieces. So every day we get a chance to work with different types of engineers. So for instance, if we're working on a project, we're designing a big wind farm, right? We have to design the foundations for that big wind farm, because that wind farm wants to rock back and forth. That's what we do. But then someone has to basically design the actual tower that holds the wind farm up and the blades. And as a blade spins, it creates electricity. So you have an electrical engineer who works on those sort of things. So every day you get a chance to work with a number of different engineers, a number of different decision makers, clients and owners. So every day gets to be an exercise in teamwork.
So what would you tell kids who aren't so sure about engineering, or who maybe think that they're not cut out to be an engineer?
I know that people come into engineering school and say, I'm just really bad at math, or I'm just really bad at science, and I can't cut it. But I think engineers, they think a different way. And as much as I want to say I use all my calculus and all my hard math, it's good to have the theory, but it's also good to have the practice of being able to think through those projects. So I would say don't let that hold you back. If you really enjoy the ability to try new things, you really enjoy the ability to see things being built, you like working with your hands, or you just like being involved in something that gets to give back to society every day, engineering is a great profession to be involved in. So I would say, don't be worried about the math, don't be worried about the science, because engineers by nature, we love to teach each other, love to share knowledge. Remember when I was in school, I had classmates of mine who would basically tutor me through some hard projects, and together, like teamwork, we would get through those classes. So I wouldn't let that challenge stop anyone.
Yes, that's some great advice. So we have another audience question from Jennifer. How long is the training for your field, and what degrees do you need?
Well, the training for our field for civil engineering is a typical 4-year degree, like you go through college. And that's the same for most engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical, biomedical. It's a standard 4-year process. After 4 years, most engineers do actually go into the working world. They go and start working with a private company, a public agency, or they could be working for another organization. Once you go and continue your work, that's basically engineering as a job. And as I mentioned before, professional engineers are people who have a license to engineering. They really take the time to make this not just a job for them, but a career, something that's going to last them a lifetime. So 4 years is the minimum. But then people who actually want to continue this career tend to go for their license, which takes 1 year after that. I myself went for a master's degree, but I love the work that we were doing. I just wanted to learn so much more about it. And then I went for a PhD afterward, but not everyone's as crazy as me. So I'd say the minimum you need is 4 years to get through. A lot of folks do go to work. That's a good question Jennifer asked. And if you really enjoy the subject, which most engineers do, you might go for your license afterward and then degrees if you like after that.
So what's something you've done in your life that you're really proud of?
I think something that I'm really proud of, Tiffany, is the ability, again, just to be a teacher and a volunteer. It's a really big part of me, and I think that's why engineering comes so naturally to me. Engineers love giving back to society, whether it's helping us, again, design and build infrastructure that benefits all of our population and society around us. But not only that, we get to see people enjoy that. So that is something that I enjoy doing my work. And at night, I get to be a professor and a teacher. I get to give back to my students who learn that as well. And then on my weekends, I get to volunteer at great organizations like Discovery, volunteer with our National Society of Professional Engineers. So I really find it positive, and I think it's the best thing. I get to be just a volunteer and I get to give back to society in a number of different ways.
That's amazing that you have such a passion for engineering and you use that passion to help others.
Yeah.
So when you were a kid, who was your role model and why?
Oh, that's a good question too. So I think that passion actually comes from my role model, which is my father. And my dad was also a civil engineer. He came from India. He moved here in the early 1980s. And he was always just an amazing support system for me and my brother to do what we wanted to do. I ended up in engineering because I just loved watching what he did. He really got a chance to, again, work with his hands, get to work on construction sites. He got to do designs. He got to see things being made all the time. And I remember being a kid, we would drive down the road. He said I was involved in that project. I remember designing that project. And the enthusiasm he had for the work that he did was basically unparalleled. He really, really liked what he was doing. And that question you asked earlier about what would you ask people who feel hesitant to go in engineering? I was worried about going to engineering. I might have gone to something else. I was thinking about medicine at that point. But he was a really good person to help me show that engineering could be a career that I could enjoy. And because of him, I got a chance to do that. So he's my superhero. He's someone that I really look up to.
I can see how important a good mentor like your dad is in developing into a better engineer. So we have another audience question. Eileen wants to know if you work on bridges and do you know how to put stanchions underwater with bridges?
I do. I get to work on bridges pretty frequently. And bridge work is actually pretty enjoyable because you get a chance to cross over something, whether it's water, whether it's land, whether it's existing roadway too. The question that Tiffany asked about putting stanchions and foundations and piles down beneath those bridges, we use pretty large equipment and these bridges that are pretty heavy loads. We drive them into the ground by pounding steel pipes into the ground that can go pretty deep until they get to a point where they're actually on a strong foundation beneath them to carry all that heavy weight. Sometimes if the soil is very soft, if you're on the edge of a riverbank, for instance, and you have a lot of mud and muck, you might actually put that pile down in the ground, that pipe. You'll drill inside of it, you fill it with concrete, you put some more steel in it. So it's really fun to get a chance to watch those sort of things being built because you're using huge machinery and they're putting large pieces of concrete, large pieces of steel to transmit hundreds of thousands of pounds of load into the ground.
Yeah, I'm sure that's an amazing process. Yeah. So what do you do when you're not at work? What are your hobbies and interests?
When I'm not at work, which is almost all the time, I really enjoy being outdoors. On the winter times, I love to ski quite a bit. I love to watch ice hockey. during the summer times, which is the best times for me. I get a chance to go kayaking and hiking and be outdoors and just barbecue. I love spending time just unwinding and relaxing.
Yeah, that sounds really fun. So we have another audience question from Ashley. What is the hardest project you've worked on?
Wow, that is a good question. The hardest project that I've worked on. I think the hardest project, it wasn't technically the hardest, but it was a pipeline that went from two different states, from Pennsylvania to New Jersey. And it was a 140-mile long pipeline. We talked about geohazards before. This pipeline had to cross 14 rivers, including the Delaware River. The pipeline had to go through 3 large caves or sinkholes or karsts where you have a lot of areas. Pennsylvania is also known for a lot of coal mines, so it went through 3 coal mines as well. But what made it really hard was the fact that it went through hundreds of people's backyards and over mountains and through overpasses and water. So being a civil engineer gets to be, get to interact with people around you. So that project, which lasted almost 4.5 years, really had me interacting, not just in the office, which is what engineers think of, doing the design work and the calculations, but getting out there and talking to the DEP and talking to the Army Corps, talking to the landowners and talking to our clients. So as I mentioned before too, really getting a chance to work with everyone. And that was a pretty difficult project. You're taking everyone's thoughts into considerations and trying to come up with a solution that matches all those constraints and matches all those things that can go wrong.
Yes, I'm sure communication is a very important quality that we don't really learn as much like as a subject in school or anything.
That's right.
It's equally necessary.
Yeah.
So if you could have any superpower, what would you choose and why?
If I had any superpower, I think I would love the superpower of teleportation. I always am running from one thing to the next, whether I'm going to a school event or I'm going to work, or I'm going to go teach. I always seem to not have enough hours in the day. So I think if I can teleport from one place to the next, I can get to places faster. I can have more time to do the things that I enjoy doing. So I want to teleport. That's what I want to do.
I like that one.
Yeah.
What is a skill that you haven't quite mastered yet but would like to?
I think one thing I can improve on is the art of saying no. So I really enjoy volunteering and being involved in teaching and also just working full time too as a practicing engineer. I had a great opportunity to grow and do all these different roles and positions because I said yes to a lot of different things. And when you're an early career professional, one thing that my role model and my dad said was just say yes to a lot of different things, because when you're uncomfortable, that's when you learn, that's when change happens. So early on in my career, I'd say yes to everything. I'd learn all this new stuff. I'd go out there and try to teach. I'd go out there and try to participate with the National Society of Professional Engineers. But now that I'm actually in a more stable part of my life, I could probably say no to a few more things.
We have another audience question. Students want to know if you ever got hurt while working.
Well, safety is actually the most important thing. So luckily, in the 13.5 years I've been out there, I have not gotten hurt yet. But that's a really, really important thing, because when you're dealing with construction sites, which engineers do go to pretty often, and not only that, you're dealing with underground conditions, like what we deal with for geotechnical engineers. You're really coming across big open excavations that can be 4 and 5 and 40 feet deep in the ground. So they're pretty dangerous. You're working up against a cliff. Or if you're working on a project where you're doing a tunnel through rock and the rock can just come into the tunnel at that point if it's not held back correctly. So safety is a big thing. But most engineers take that safety seriously. We want to go home and spend time with our loved ones. So we do spend a lot of time just making sure that we design things that are safe. So when we go out there and people also work there, it's just naturally safe by design. We also take all the proper precautions to wear our hard hats and wear our safety vests and our steel-toed boots and our glasses. So luckily, I've been safe so far, and I'm looking forward to being safe moving forward.
All right, we have our final question. It's an audience question from Brevin. How long does it take to plan a project?
Well, the project planning can take either a short period of time or a long period of time. So if you imagine you're building a small home, that could take a couple of weeks to go out there and collect the soil samples and do your investigation. And then you come back to the office and you do your design. Then you prepare your drawings to be able to actually build that foundation. And that could be a pretty short process. Or if you're working on a bridge, for instance, right, that might take a few years to go out there and collect the samples, go out there and do the analysis, watch the construction being built. Or some projects could just take a very long period of time. I've worked on some projects that I started in my early career about 10 or 12 years ago, and they're still not built yet. So it depends on how large the project is, and also depends how important the project is for the folks who are designing and developing it.
Well, I believe that that's all the questions we have time for today. Thank you, Dr. V, for joining us today. I definitely learned a lot.
Thanks, Tiffany.
And thanks to all of you for tuning in. Please join us again on Thursday, November 4th for our next Chats with Changemakers, where we will meet Ali, an engineer at a Mexican nonprofit that improves access to clean water. See you next time.